what's this millennial doing up here? What does he know about quality? In the 2 years that I've had at Sartorius, I've been able to get a better grasp on what exactly quality means, particularly in the digital age. Now, when it comes to digital systems, that's a bit something that's more natural for me, coming from a younger generation. But now it's my goal in 45 minutes to prove to you that I have an understanding of quality and how that can be applied for digitization in the modern world of quality systems. So I'm going to start off with a couple questions. Show of hands if you've heard of SharePoint before. All right. Oh, that's great. I mean, no one at my company really knew, so it was my role to roll it out in the company. But how many of you are involved in approving documents through a document control system? Okay. And how many of you like that document control system? That's the important thing. Previously, with before our SharePoint system, we had a paper-based system, which gave us a bunch of problems. We had a document control coordinator who was responsible for managing all of the approvals of over 600 documents within a 2-year period. So you can imagine this was chaos, so we needed a better system. So to tackle any problem that we have in quality, and just to bring this down to a level that I think we can all understand here, we need to take the approach of applying DMAIC to our system. We need to define what our problem is, measure the performance to see that there is a problem, analyze what might be possible causes of that problem, suggest improvements based on that analysis, and then control those improvements to ensure that we have future success. Go ahead. To start, we're going to have to define what our current system is. We started with an old system that was involved on a shared drive in our company. This shared drive had a location for editable documents, which could be originated by people who were creating drafts of these documents, and then there was a public-facing uneditable section. In addition, we had 2 business entities, so there would be locations for the one side of the company and ones for the other. And then finally, there was a location for digital records so that we could keep track of all of the previous versions of documents. Now, what this means is that there were up to 6 locations that a document had to be maintained and updated in every time it was approved. So multiply those 600 documents by 6 locations, you've got a lot of chaos. Finally, whenever everything was said and done, we had to print a record of the documents themselves and the forms that were associated with those documents to go on file. In addition, the actual approval process involved sending around emails containing the documents themselves to be approved with a form attached to sign off on for that approval. The forms were not linked to these documents in any way. So just to show you, because I like animations because I'm all animated, I've got a little diagram showing you that when a document wanted to be approved, the person approving the document would have to request a draft of the document from the document control coordinator. They would send that draft back when it was ready to be approved so that they could go ahead and send it out to all of the stakeholders that needed to approve it. And this would be a serial process, so you had to wait for one person and the next to approve the document. So this could take as long as the slowest person would. And you know people in your company, not everyone works at the same speed. Once it was approved by everyone, the document got turned into an uneditable PDF. And then 4 more copies up to 5 more copies would have to be created so that it could be stored in all of the various locations that I had described. Go ahead. Now this was all the role of the document control coordinator who managed this process. And then once they were over there, she would have to print up a form showing all of these signatures that had been sent around and the approved document to be stored on file. So now that we understand what the process is that we're dealing with, we have to define what exactly is the problem of this process. So we started with a problem statement, crucially being document control is inefficient, plain and simple. The business case for why we should care about this is that document control needs to be performed so that documents reflect the current processes, whether in terms of compliance, and also optimize business practices so that we're not doing something unnecessarily long. And then finally,
oops, here he goes.
our goal was to make a less resource intense document control system so that people could get back to the work that they really want to do. At the end of the day, nobody wants to spend any more time approving documents than they have to, but it's a job that's clearly very important to the business. So we started with a SIPOC. Now what this means, as you probably know, is the supplier inputs, the product, and the process, and the outputs, and understanding who our customer is from this process. So we start by saying that the people who originate documents are our suppliers, and we understand that they input drafts of control documents into the process. The document approval is managed by the document control coordinator and all those stakeholders involved. And then the output is we get these approved documents which can be used by employees. And then at the end of the day, how efficiently those employees use their time affects what the customer will pay at the end of the day. So once we determined who our customer was, we went to them and got their voice. We found out that they found documents to be hard to find, not standardized, and not accurate or up to date. Now this led to confusions with work processes, so that if someone was completing a process based on a workflow that was published, it could be inaccurate, it could be difficult for them to interpret, and we wanted to make it as simple as possible for them to access documents which were actually up to date.
I hate to bother you now about this, but this is very, very important.
Yes.
This is what we're talking about. You're probably the main reason why I came today.
Really?
But when you say the documents are not standardized, what do you mean?
So we have a standard accepted template as far as ISO requires a standard template of what information is required within a document, and then on top of that, our company has certain features like a logo, certain formatting that are required for documents, so that you can easily locate things like the page number or the person who created the document when you go back to visit the document.
So the standard basically could come from a outside standard like ISO or AS9 or whatever.
Correct.
And or internally.
There are definitely
set.
levels of standardization when it comes to quality. Every department's going to have its own conventions, but we wanted to keep, as far as document controls goes, we wanted to give people a template that complied with both higher level standards such as ISO and lower level company regulations. So in order to measure the inefficiency or slowness, if you will, of this system, we had to make an operational definition of what document approval really was. So we define that as being the point at which the draft is received by the document control coordinator to the point when it is finally publicly available. The logical unit for this was in days, and this was manually logged by the document control coordinator in our various document approval logs. So what we found from the baseline data is that you can see there's a wide range of days of approval. At the bottom, those are in tens, so the highest of the sample that we took for our document approval took up to 80 days. Now, can you imagine what could happen to a document in 80 days? You could get new machines, the old ones could go out, things could go obsolete in that amount of time. So what this means is that on average, sorry that cut out, on average, it took 26 days for a document to get approved from start to finish. And then that 26 days varied greatly with a standard deviance of 20 days. So you can see that our data set was clearly not an acceptable tightness. So once we had this data, it was time to analyze what it all meant. As you can see, it was a slow process. So we started with looking at causes of rework. Updating data logs was one of these sources, and then we moved on to the redundancies where we saw that documents were being uploaded in way too many places for no good reason. There were bottlenecks when managers went to approve documents and it wasn't available for them. And inspections and decisions had to be made by the document control coordinator to ensure that that formatting was being followed and standardized. And then finally, as you can imagine, there were a ton of handoffs between this person sending an email to so-and-so about is this document approved. The document had to go back and forth between the document control coordinator and any stakeholders in the process because you had to approve the document one after the other. So these were the starting point for what we saw as possible causes for this slowdown. Then we moved on to the 8 ways as a way to brainstorm what could be causing our process to operate inefficiently. We started with the defects, again, noticing that the formatting was a key issue that was slowing down our process, and additionally, sometimes documents getting manually moved and stored will get improperly logged. There was an overproduction in that there were too many places to locate these documents in. It proved difficult for people to access them, and then in addition, it was difficult for the document control coordinator to update all these locations. There was waiting between approvals as the document had to be received by one person, reviewed, signed off on, sent back to the document control coordinator to move on to the next stage. And there was non-utilized talent in the form of a SharePoint server which had been set up and not been utilized by our department. You know, to finish off, I know there aren't 4 wastes, there are 8, so to get to the rest, there were transportation issues in that the document had to be emailed around the company to all different departments. That would get lost in sometimes in people's inboxes. We would have to send follow-up emails. It was a mess. Then there were inventory issues when the documents that we did actually have updated didn't reflect the current standards, current processes, and just failed to be obsoleted sometimes when people didn't realize that they weren't correct. There were motion issues in that when you received an email to approve a document, you would get a form to sign off on. Now, we didn't have any digital signature system set up, so the standard procedure was to print out this form, sign it, and then send it back. You can imagine how much paper waste that created, and in addition, it was just unnecessary time. And then finally, our extra processing occurred in the form of manually updating data logs, whereas digital systems could do this automatically for us. So to compile this all into a fishbone diagram to understand what was causing our output, we had to understand the inputs. As you could see, our manpower causes were that people are busy, and that there were numerous handoffs which led to confusions. The material issues involved that the documents were just incorrectly formatted and infrequently updated as a result. There were method issues in that documents were approved in series and that the logging of data and moving of documents was manual process. There were environmental causes due to the fact that documents were hard to locate or not even available in terms of editable documents, as they had to be requested from the document control coordinator. And then machine issues were due to the fact that these emails were being sent back and forth, and that forms had to be printed out and sent back to the document control coordinator. So once we had all this compiled, we noticed 3 general categories that these issues fell under. There was serial approval issues, which were caused by the fact that documents had to be approved one after the other. The file structure was confusing and inaccessible, didn't provide the level of security that we needed. And finally, our paper-based system was causing unnecessary time and paper waste, which could be eliminated with the digital process. So, our solution was to look to SharePoint. We decided that we needed a better document system. Now, we had considered other document management systems, but what stuck out about SharePoint to us is, well, for one thing, it was already in place in our company, and furthermore, it allowed us a level of customization unseen by any other document management systems. So we were able to create a better document storage system, reducing the number of locations where documents were stored to 2. Those locations were permission controlled so that the site administrator could explicitly say, you can edit this, you can't edit this, so that we could manage that level of control. And then in addition, as I mentioned, it allowed us to customize a document approval workflow so that we could have electronic approval of documents, which was directly tied to the documents. There were emails that were automatically sent out by the system, linking you back to the documents and the tasks you needed to complete. And then finally, approval could once and for all be done at the same time. I wouldn't have to wait on Joe Blow to have to go and complete my approval of this document. And that's just an image of the homepage, give you a little idea. SharePoint doesn't have to be ugly, just saying. I know I've had some bad experiences with it, but SharePoint offers you a lot of creativity in a way similar to designing a site with Microsoft Word would be. So our key goal was to establish a pull within our system and to make a system that flowed better. So as you can see with the guy pulling the system, we wanted our originators to have control over starting the approval process. As you saw in the beginning when I was describing the old system, the document approval actually started with the document control coordinator and needed to be requested by that originator. But now, originators can directly access documents and send that document whenever they feel like through the approval workflow. They're allowed to control who's approving the document, as they are the most knowledgeable people on who would be stakeholders of the document, and they can set a training delay so that if such a document doesn't require a full 14 days to get everyone trained on, say you've got a small department, say it's just a biennial update, you can say, oh, maybe it should be a little less, or even a little more. And then finally, as I mentioned with the parallel process, this allowed us greater control over getting people to approve when they were available and not when the document was available to them. Then finally, we considered the implications of 5S on our system. We sorted the system into 2 libraries instead of the mess of 6 libraries that we previously had. The workflow sent out emails which sent people directly to the content that they needed, linking both the document that was being approved by that person and the task to complete. We made it shine by ensuring that it would be predictable, validating the system to ensure that it complied with standards and that it would be capable of reproducing results for the future. It was standardized when we drafted up a work instruction to describe the proper function of the site. Now, this work instruction is not for the faint of heart. It's like 14 pages or something, so obviously I trained people on this. And in addition, I don't have it here, but we created a help center within our site to make sure that people wouldn't have to go directly for us for every little thing. So again, back to Pull, people are able to access the information when they need it. And then finally, to sustain, as I mentioned, we trained people to the system, and now we've had our first audit on it, and it has been successful. So once we had decided all of those points to improve upon, we needed to make sure that there were measures in place to stop the same mistakes from happening again in the future. We looked at hard poke-yoke. Now what this means is we set permissions on these 2 libraries, as they're called, to make sure that the documents would only be editable to people who should be editing documents, and that the public versions of documents were not editable under any circumstances. This was something that couldn't be achieved with the previous folder structure. In addition to this, the workflow had the benefit of automatically producing certain deliverables, such as it automated data logging from the workflow so we could perform analysis of those metrics going forward. And in addition, documents were automatically moved between locations. So you can imagine all of this reduced the workload of the DCC tremendously. Then finally, for soft poke-yoke, we were able to create standardized templates that are provided directly in the site. So instead of saying, oh, document control coordinator, can I have a copy of what a formatting should look like for this document? Or even worse, go to an old document, try to copy your stuff into that, and then propagate errors. Now you can go on the site, click new, and you've got a new document with the standardized formatting. There's a biennial review calendar in there as well, so that every 2 years you can see when your documents need to be updated to make sure that they're being done so regularly. And as I mentioned, there's a help wiki in there to help you with anything that we had not taught you about necessarily, or anything that you might have forgotten in the process. So what this all looks like is this chart here. You start off with the originator taking control of the approval process, deciding who will be approving on the document and how long it should delay before it is released to the public. Then the document control coordinator approves the document. If at any point a person rejects, the workflow stops and everyone's notified. If the document control coordinator does approve of this content, which of the formatting, which is now standardized because of that template provided in the site, the document approval will pass on to any of those stakeholders mentioned by the initiator. And then at that point, the document will be approved after a delay period. So I bet that's a bit conceptual like this, So if we go to the next slide, I've actually got it broken down into a more comfortable format. So here we start with the editing library. This is the place where originators can access their documents to make changes whenever they feel like. So if they notice something needs to be updated, all they have to do is create the document, start a workflow, which will automatically send off an email to the document control coordinator, who will approve or reject that document accordingly based on the formatting. Once they approve, documents, tasks get sent out to each person approving in the workflow simultaneously, meaning that they can all review the document at the same time, reducing bottlenecks. And then if everyone approves, then only one copy goes over to the major library, the public-facing library, where the document will not be editable and will be accessible by everyday employees to use in their job functions. So the results of this process were pretty exciting. As you can see, we've managed to reduce the time that document approval takes significantly. As far as the hard numbers, we reduced the average approval time to 14 days with this much reduced standard deviation of 10 days. So this turns into a 46% improvement, which made everyone pretty happy that they don't have to spend as much time approving documents. That's great and all, but now we've got to take control of our improvements to make sure that they'll last for the future. So we had to make a control, monitor, and response plan. Our control was to ensure that documents did not extend over a 30-day duration of document approval. We monitor this by having the DCC review data that's automatically logged by the system on a quarterly basis, and if they notice any issues with this, the response is to have the assigned site administrator perform a root cause analysis of what might be causing this sort of issue so that we can prevent it in future cases. And then finally, it came time to storyboard our progress and make documentation for all of the steps that we had performed. We defined our problem, measured the performance, analyzed our process to see what could be improved, and then once those improvements were shown to produce benefits, then we were able to control them. So the most important part of any project, besides the actual benefits, is learning something about it. So what we were able to take away from this adventure, if we can call it that, is that we performed our first validation on a document management system, which was a great step forward for us as we had never done anything like this before. In addition, since our company wasn't so familiar with SharePoint back then, I know a lot can change in 2 years, but we got interest both within the department and in the company to expand our SharePoint capabilities. People are using SharePoint for all sorts of different applications now, and it has been of great benefit to our company. And then finally, we still take to this day feedback on any opportunities we can improve upon so that we can keep the system working better and better. As you know, quality is never a dead process, it's always improving. We learned. So are there any questions?